Have you been on the lookout for some tropical houseplants that have got really interesting foliage? It's not always about the blooms. The foliage can be really unusual, colourful and really attractive. If you're interested in seeing some of my top favourite foliage houseplants, stick around with me. Hi, my name is Memo, this is my channel, Houseplantygoodness, and essentially it's a place where I like to geek out about my big passion. You might be able to see some of it behind me, it's tropical houseplants. So today I thought I would actually showcase some of my favourite houseplants in terms of their foliage. It might be because they've got unusual foliage, it might be the colour payoff, or it might just be because I think the plant is really, really cool. Again, these are just my opinions. I do encourage you, as always, drop in the comments down below which ones might be your favourite foliage or kind of interesting and unusual foliage houseplants down below. I know a lot of us are always looking for like the new interesting houseplant in terms of what it looks like. You might also tell me, you know what, some of these really common houseplants, for me, they're really beautiful. I think their foliage is fantastic. Drop it down below. Let's all have that conversation. But yeah, without further ado, let's look at one of my first houseplants that I think I've ever owned in my collection, which had really interesting foliage. So the first plant is a plant that I unfortunately no longer have in my collection. Not because there was any issue with the plant, but because it was just getting a bit too big and I didn't really have the space of kind of where to place it so that it still got its best kind of conditions, light, all of these things. So this was a plant that I gifted to another planty friend who were very, very happy about it when they got it. I think it's still doing quite well. It's a relatively hardy plant. So this is a Dieffenbachia. And the Dieffenbachias, for those that might not know, also have got a colloquial name or kind of a common name, which is the dumb cane. And this is at least here in the UK. I don't know if other places around the world call it something different. And I know other people have mentioned this before, but I will do as well. The reason why it was called the dumb cane, and if I'm not mistaken, historically at least, the actual sap from the Dieffenbachias is something that can really cause a reaction, usually when swallowed. And if I'm not mistaken, this might all be hearsay, but I remember reading stories about the fact that it could have potentially been used during one of the either world wars or one of the wars somewhere in the world as a bit of a torture device, because they would make kind of prisoners of war kind of ingest the sap from this plant and it would kind of strike them dumb, as in like they couldn't talk, they couldn't breathe. It kind of basically creates a reaction around your kind of airways. So very interesting plant. However, with Dieffenbachias, I would always say if you are ever kind of handling Dieffenbachias, any of their sap gets on you, wash your hands or anywhere else that it might get on really, really well. You just don't want any of that sap to stay on you for too long. But yes, without further ado, some people might have already guessed which one I'm going to be talking about, the Dieffenbachia Reflector. And I think there might be a scientific name that I can find somewhere and I'll add it somewhere at the top. But yeah, I mean, can you tell with this plant why I'm adding it into this selection? It is absolutely stunning, and I'm hoping to find some good pictures of mine. And this is a plant that is very Instagrammable, very, very Instagrammable, because it does have that foliage that has almost got a bit of a reflection to it. It is truly beautiful. You can get a bit of a camo effect to the leaves as well. And that main vein on the leaf is just fantastic, basically. And it is one of those ones that if it gets the right kind of care, and I actually didn't find it a particularly difficult houseplant to care for, that's why I'm adding it into this list, is a kind of joy to grow, really. You do need to give it a bit more light. Dieffenbachias are some of those plants, again, that everybody just like, they'll do okay in like low light. Yes, they'll do okay, as in like they will die off very, very, very slowly. They can handle very low light. But as with most houseplants, I find, if you give it kind of medium to bright indirect light, it will do amazing things for you. Also, because of the foliage and because of the kind of marcation and the marks on the foliage, that kind of reflective element of it, which is where it gets its name from as well, at least its common name or trade name theoretically, it does kind of shine. I've got no other ways of kind of describing it, and it's just a very cool plant that doesn't need an awful lot of fussing, because a lot of the time, and some of the other plants that I'm going to have on this list, they've got very unusual and kind of interesting foliage, but they might not be the easiest thing to care for most people. I think, having spoken to a few people with the Dieffenbachia Reflector, this is one that a lot of people tend to gel with quite well, and by and large, not a sweeping generalization if I can help it, but by and large, most people tend to do okay with this plant. Moving on to a Cissus now. So a Cissus is a plant that is part of the grape family. So if you've ever had grapes, like it's part of the same wider family, and it has got similar kind of growing tendencies. So it will throw out little tendrils that will wrap around things, and that's how it supports itself. And again, some people that have been here for a while might be guessing what I'm going to say. This is a plant that I no longer have in my collection. I probably wouldn't add it back into my collection because I personally struggled to keep it happy. I also know a lot of people that struggled to keep it happy. However, it doesn't take away, and this is not what this video is about, is not me telling you which ones are the easiest houseplants. I'm just giving you some of the most striking foliage houseplants. This is not an exhaustive list, by the way. I could sit here and talk about these kind of this topic at least for a few hours. But yes, the Cissus Discolor. It is a cissus that a lot of people sometimes might call I think it's the vining begonia, or the vining begonia rex. It is not a begonia, but you can kind of understand why people might have given it that name. The leaves, the foliage does look like it could be part of the begonia family, and hopefully I'll find a picture of one of my other begonias and add it here as well. And you can kind of see some of the similarity as well. Truly stunning plant, very deep red color on the underside of the leaves, silveriness and kind of marcations on the leaves make it truly unique. It is a slightly velvety leaf, if I'm not mistaken. It's been a while since I've owned it. And as with that, I generally find, at least in my experience, most velvety type plants, not all of them, but most velvety type plants, the kind of velvety leaves, tend to be a bit more demanding. This one needs a lot of humidity, and it needs kind of stable temperatures, and it needs the light to be just right. And this was a pain for me. I don't have it in my collection for very good reason. I just kind of gave up after a while because I'm just like, I ain't got no time for this. But again, stunning foliage. Now moving into a plant that's a bit on the larger side of things, and this is a Colocasia. And this is a Colocasia that I've grown successfully for a good few years. Unfortunately, I think this was one that I took out into the garden last year. I took it into my unheated greenhouse over the winter, and I did this for a couple of years prior. I took off all the foliage, so I let it kind of go down to like a corm and essentially go into hibernation over the winter to then bring it back out again this spring. I have checked on it since. It didn't make the winter, basically. However, I did manage to find another bulb of it, so I am growing it again this year. And this is the Colocasia Black Magic. Now, people that have been here on my channel for a while might know that there's been a bit of debate and a bit of conversation about this, at least with one of the sellers around here, who kind of messaged me and said, I don't think that is a Colocasia Black Magic, I think it's a Colocasia Black Coral, because both of these plants are very, very similar. I think the Black Magic is a more matte texture to the leaves, and the way that the foliage comes in tends to be almost that kind of black color, and the Black Coral is a slightly shinier leaf, and it comes in green and then goes black, or almost black. And because of a specific seller that I bought it from a few years back, I still think that I had the Black Magic. But even if I had the Black Coral, either one of these plants, they are so stinking similar that I think we are just splitting hairs at the moment. I know there was a debate because one was cheaper than the other, fine. But, I mean, for the people that have got Gothic roots, who were kind of the emo children, the goths of the old days, or people that are really into like dark, almost black foliage, for me, the Colocasia Black Coral, Colocasia Black Magic is possibly the closest dark plant that I have ever owned, me personally at least, that the color is, and I always say almost black, because in the right light you can see that it's a very, 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 very deep green, but for all intents and purposes, you look at it, it's black, and it is black. So, stunning, and it ticks all the boxes. However, this plant will get huge if you let it. So if you really want a big impact plant that has got black foliage, Colocasia Black Magic or Colocasia Black Coral are definitely going to make you very, very happy. It will tick all of the boxes. Stunning plant, and I still think massively underrated. Moving into a slight relative of a Colocasia, this time it's going to be an Alocasia. So again, people that have been here for a while will know that a lot of Colocasias around the world, not all of them, are edible. So the tubers, sometimes they're called taro roots, not all of them, again, as I said. And I don't know, there's maybe been some debate as well that the taro root is slightly different kind of species than, or genus than the Colocasia, but I'm not going to touch on that debate. I know, at least for a fact, back home, and if I find a picture, I'll add it here, in Cyprus, they do use Colocasia root as kind of a food, basically. So it's kind of chopped up, and almost think of it like being used a bit as a potato, and it's used in kind of meat stews. So very, very nice flavor, by the way, very, very cool. But yeah, this is the plant that I'm going to be talking about, though, is an Alocasia. And by and large, if I'm not mistaken, Alocasias generally are not edible. No part of it is edible. And the way that the foliage will kind of hang tends to give you a bit of an indication, not always again, as to the difference between an Alocasia and a Colocasia. But this Alocasia has become a lot more popular recently, and I will add it here. And this was the Alocasia that was, for many, many years, called the Alocasia Friedeck. It is not the Alocasia Friedeck, it is the Alocasia Micholitziana. And again, I might be butchering that name slightly, but the Alocasia Friedeck is the variegated form of this, if I'm not mistaken. The Micholitziana is the all-green form. So it doesn't take away from the fact that this is a truly, truly beautiful Alocasia. I've hopefully got a picture here of a kind of large Alocasia Micholitziana. And it is, at least in my experience, possibly one of the easiest Alocasias that I have ever grown. I know that's not been the case for everybody. It does have slightly velvety leaves. That kind of marcation on the leaves makes it truly interesting. It's different, but it's subtly different, if that makes sense. So the example that I was giving before of the reflector, that's different and it's in your face about it. Same with the Cissus Discolor. This one is different, but in a more subtle way. And I will say, and maybe this has just been my experience, you can see I've got a lot of different looking houseplants in my conservatory and around my house. The Alocasia Micholitziana, however, is the one plant almost without fail that my kind of non-planty friends, family will come into the house and just gravitate towards it and go, ooh, this is really cool, what is this? So, and I think I've heard similar stories from other kind of planty parents as well. So definitely a plant that will wow. I'm surprised because it didn't originally kind of catch me in the same way that it does everybody else. But I kind of get it. I don't know, for me, if I squint hard enough, it looks a bit like a mask, but that might just be me kind of imagining things. But very, very cool foliage. Next one is a begonia. And this is a rhizomatous begonia, so this is a begonia that tends to be a bit more kind of like low-lying. And shout out to the person when I was making my this or that comparison video, and I'll link it at the top, where I was talking about begonias, like rhizomatous begonias and cane begonias, and somebody was mentioning some of the begonias that I was giving as example were begonia rexes, not necessarily rhizomatous begonias, although I do have a sneaky suspicion, I might be wrong, I do have a sneaky suspicion that rhizomatous begonias are rex begonias, or rex begonias are part of the rhizomatous begonias. I might be entirely wrong, I am not a begonia head. If you are and you know more than I do, please tell me that I'm an idiot down in the comments below and tell me why. But yeah, this is a begonia that I think is truly stunning. There are two different begonias that are very, very similar. I have got one of the two, so I can talk to that one, and this is the Begonia Mellanobullata. Oh, again, it's a bit like, awesome plant. And it is because you get those kind of spikes on the leaves. It's very unusual. I was enamored with it the first moment that I saw it, before, at least a year or two before I was able to even find it to get it in my collection. And originally I did not want the Begonia Mellanobullata. I wanted the one that was very similar, which is the Begonia ferox or ferox. And the difference, as far as I can tell, they look very similar in terms of their foliage. But the difference is that the Begonia ferox, when it's much more juvenile and the leaves are first starting to come off, they are very smooth and green and kind of nothing to write home about. And as they mature, they get those boulets, which is the boulets, the little spikes that you get on the leaves, which by the way are hollow. So on the back side of it, it is kind of like a deep red and kind of hollow cones underneath it. And at the top, they're black and oh, very, very cool. But the Mellanobullata, which I got, which I am so happy I did, from a juvenile leaf, it will have those spikes. And I'll show you a bit of a picture. I don't want to move mine because it got stressed highly. I almost lost this plant very, very recently, but it's making a comeback and I really do not want to disturb it too much. I have got some older pictures that I will add here of what it kind of looked like in its full glory, but life of a plant parent, we're always rehabbing one thing or another. It doesn't matter how long you might have had a plant, it can still throw a hissy fit and you might have to take it back from scratch basically, which is what I'm doing with this. But you will see the younger, more juvenile leaves have still got those boulets, spikes basically on it. Truly, truly stunning, and to me, again, a bit of a conversation starter of a plant because it's very, very different looking kind of foliage. Now the next one I can actually kind of hold up and show you. It's looking a bit kind of like wild and free at the moment, but let me get one of the older leaves. Ugh, this is also dusty as all get out. So this is one of the smallest leaves that's on there. I will kind of maybe keep this big one here so you can kind of see it in the front. This is the Philodendron Dean McDowell. So it's a philodendron hybrid. It is a hybrid of the Philodendron gloriosum and the Philodendron pastusanum. And for the people that have been here for a while, very controversially said that I'm kind of getting tired of my gloriosum. For the people that were asking, yes, it is still in my collection. I had two. One was really, really struggling. That one is no longer in my collection because it did not bring me no joy no more. But I do have my big Mama Jamma. It is still here and it's got 2 growing points, so it's still growing. My pastusanum, I tried for years to keep it happy. It would be the biggest spider mite magnet that I ever had. But this one, which I finally was able to get as a swap at one of the London plant swaps, there are loads that are happening now all over the UK, and I will give you a little kind of link to their website up at the top and down below. Big shout out to Emma and Lisa who are organising that. Amazing, amazing job, and I'm so glad that it's going from strength to strength. But yeah, I was able to get this as a swap, and I know some of you might be looking at this and kind of going, it's not a velvety leaf. It's not particularly, it's kind of matte. And you can see it's been a bit too close to the light and all of these things and some of the smaller foliage. And the problem that I'm having is that it is a crawler and I'm not growing it as a crawler. So this is one that needs to get repotted into a kind of trough planter. But for me, and I have seen these absolutely large in people's collections, and at some point I'm hoping that this will get to that size, but foliage, pillowy is the word that I think everybody thinks of when they think of this foliage. And it doesn't, I find that this specific hybrid grows better in my experience and more stably than both the gloriosum and the pastusanum. So stunning, stunning plant. Might not be for everybody. Some people might say this is a bit dull, but when you see this huge, and it's not, it's giving a bit at the moment, but when you see this huge, oh, you just feel like it's just like, oh, I just want to go and rest my head. It looks so, so soft. So definitely had to add this into this list. Right, and the very, very final plant, I've kind of scooched you over so you can see. I do have some slightly older leaves. This is an Anthurium, and I know a lot more people are getting into the kind of pendant or kind of long strappy leaf Anthuriums. This is my Anthurium vittariifolium, and I mean, belts, just belts, belts. And I know there are plenty of kind of pendant type Anthuriums. I think it's pendant type, if I'm not mistaken. Otherwise, I will correct myself at the top there. But very, very, very cool. Unusual foliage, because you're not going to see a lot of foliage that is quite so long and thin. And actually, I will say that this has probably been one of the easiest Anthuriums that I have ever grown, by far. Interestingly enough, I found that this Anthurium is one that doesn't mind going a bit dry, and also this is a plant, because it cascades down as it does, it is a plant that if you've got loads of plant shelves and you've got an awful lot of plants, and you want to get some plants kind of that are maybe going to go a bit higher and you don't have any kind of like downward light from the top and you're worried about nothing being able to grow there, this is a great little addition that you can put very high up on a shelf. You still get all the foliage coming down, so it still gets light, but it doesn't have to get top-down lighting. Very, very cool and very unusual foliage as well. But yeah, what do you think of my list? Do you agree? Do you disagree? I am sure you have probably got more than just the ones that I have mentioned. So as I said in the beginning of the video, drop it down below. I think loads of people would be quite interested to find out what everybody's favorites are, and it's a good way to kind of introduce people to some new and interesting foliage houseplants. But yeah, hopefully you've enjoyed. Hopefully I shall see you here soon, and I truly, truly hope that you have a great rest of your day. Thanks. Bye.